Hey, it's Brad, and there's been a lot of space news involving, well, kind of aliens and humans in space. Now, no, we have not found aliens, but something that has recently been proposed is something called the Beacon Project. The idea here is to broadcast a very powerful radio beam into space that future or in the future, civilizations or maybe other forms of life could pick up and say, hey, there are humans or intelligent life on that planet. Now, this idea isn't the first to ever happen. In fact, back in 1974, the Arecibo message was broadcasted. So using the big radio telescope that used to exist in Puerto Rico, they broadcasted a message towards a cluster of stars, hoping that maybe there was a planet around it, because in 1974, we hadn't known about any planets around other stars, and maybe one of those planets could have life. Now, we kind of now know a lot more about planets. In fact, these clusters are unlikely places to have planets. We also now have bigger radio telescopes. And so a new project saying, well, we have big radio telescopes. Why can't we pack a lot of information there and beam a signal towards the center of our galaxy? Now, the idea here is we on the solar system, we're about 2/3 out from the center. If we beam towards the center of our galaxy, we're going to go past lots and lots and lots of stars and therefore lots of planets. So maybe one of those will have life and could pick up the message and say, hey, there's another intelligent life thing out there, and that's exciting for them. Now, there's a lot of debate about whether we should do this project or not. Now, a lot of people say maybe it's not the best idea to send a message that has where we're located, what makes us up, what do we know, to things we don't know, right? You wouldn't post your address and your Wi-Fi password and where you hide your spare key online. Why are we doing a similar of a space equivalent? And these are fair questions to ask. But in another way, we often have to realize that these messages are going to take so long to get anywhere in space. Imagine this civilization is 1,000 light years away. It's going to take 1,000 years traveling at the speed of light to reach that star system. So it won't reach it until the 3000s. And if there's a civilization there right now that has the technology to pick it up, they then could reply, but they wouldn't reply for 1,000 years after that, reaching Earth in the year 4000 something at best. So any message we send is unlikely to have any impact on us right now, or even in the really future generations. It's more of a sign and use to other civilizations to say they may not be alone and help them in their quest for searching for life. And recently, one of the exciting things that has just come out is some clues to maybe how life originated on Earth. So firstly, you may remember back in school that all life has what we call DNA and RNA in it, on Earth at least. Now, DNA and RNA is kind of the instruction code for what makes up life. But this instruction code needs ingredients. It needs nitrogen bases, sometimes we call nucleobases, needs phosphate groups, and it needs sugars. Well, previously on meteorites and in space, we've detected some of these nitrogen bases or nucleobases. We've detected the A and C groups, as well as U, which is used in RNA. But G and T has been missing until now. Analyzing this meteorite called the Murchison meteorite, which is a meteorite that fell in Victoria in 1969, discovered these last two remaining groups. So now all five that goes into DNA and RNA, the instruction codes for life, has been found. And previously we found amino acids, another key ingredient for life, on asteroids in space and even comets. We found sugars on these things as well. And this gets people excited because we often want to know, how did life start on Earth? And in order to understand how life started, we need to know how the ingredients started and where they came from. Now, making life is no different than even baking. You need all of the ingredients there, and they need to be in the right ratios, the right combinations, and that right recipe, right? I'm not a very good baker. I often throw flour and sugar together, and it turns out horrendous. So finding the key ingredients is that big step to saying, maybe, how did life start here on Earth? It doesn't mean we know this. It's just that we can at least find those ingredients other places in space, and now we found those ingredients on meteorites that have landed on Earth. Because we often wonder, did life on Earth originate differently, similar, or only on Earth? You know, is there life on Mars? Is there life on Venus? Was it in the past? Will be in the future? The fact that we found meteorites here on Earth means those meteorites could have landed on those places as well. Again, we're not saying we've solved the problem, but we have another key piece in understanding the big question of how maybe life originated on this planet, thankfully due to a meteorite that fell in Victoria in 1969. Over the past couple weeks as well, a group of private people have been spending time as the first civilian mission on the International Space Station, called Axiom Space and the Axiom 1 mission. 3 private people astronauts paying $55 million US dollars, so about 70 million Australian each, spent about a couple of weeks on the space station. Now, they were more than just tourists. They were doing some research, they were doing some space activities, but they were kind of playing this new role of civilians going into space. Now, they're not the first private people to go in space. In fact, the Russians sent quite a few people to the space station back in the early 2000s. They only had to pay $20 million, so, you know, inflation. But they took a small seat for one of the small Russian missions. They only put 3 people up at a time for a week or two. So what makes this unique is Axiom Space, the group running these missions, is aiming to develop private astronauts. So instead of being an astronaut as part of a country, say NASA and the Americans, or ESA in Europe, or Russia and Roscosmos, you would be an astronaut as part of this company. You would do the research, you would do the science, you would do the training, but you would be a private company person. And in fact, this is the potential future of space around the Earth. This is something NASA actually wants to happen. As NASA and other groups focus on the moon and Mars, there's only so much they can do. So by having private companies run the space stations, build more, train them, operate them, but still do the science and research, this allows that same science and research still to happen, but also those bigger goals of the moon and Mars. So this may be the first paving of the way of the new way astronauts and people act in space and do the science at the same time. So definitely a groundbreaking mission. Now, they actually spent a little bit longer than planned, and that was because of weather delays and logistics meant they came down a few days late. This actually created a bit of a traffic jam because in order for the next full crew of astronauts called the SpaceX Crew 4, which has now recently just taken off and reached the space station, in order for them to go up, they needed room to dock and to fit in, so they needed Axiom to come back down. So literally there was a changeover of about a day. The Axiom mission left the space station, came down, splashed down, and the new crew went up. We're almost needing a traffic system for how space is getting and how busy it's getting. And this last story, which has kind of been rumored for a bit, but a bunch of new documents recently released in the past week or two, has shown that during the great space race of the 50s and 60s, the US, instead of landing a human on the moon, was looking at landing a nuclear bomb on the moon. Yes, they were looking at blowing up a nuclear bomb on the moon. Now, we have to remember during the 50s and 60s, this space race between the US and Russia or USSR was all about dominance. Who can control space is the next domain. And there's a lot of fears about what it means for military purposes in that time. So much so that it led to treaties being formed to say that space is for the peaceful use, not for military use. Now, luckily, cooler heads prevailed, and this idea didn't go through. And as we know with history, Apollo 11 landed on the moon instead of a nuclear bomb. But it really just goes to show all of the ideas that were floating around at this time about what this new domain and this new era of space travel meant and what it was going to be used for. So luckily this idea failed and we now have a great history and era of exploration, but it really just goes to show what all was happening a little bit behind the scenes in the early days of this great space race. Now, I really hope you've liked this video and others. And if you like to follow and subscribe on it, that's great because you get to keep watching them and learning more about space and helping me produce more, hopefully excellent videos that you all enjoy. Take care.